there is good and there is bad, and it's not as obvious to what meets the eye. And the time we're in is kind of exposing that. Going back to the sexual abuse conversation, what we found from those stories coming out more and more is that just because someone is a rabbi doesn't mean they're good. Very, very fixed idea: good, bad, right,
Right.
wrong.
Right.
Let's see what's going on over here. It's exploding in the world, and then here you see someone. I've seen marriages saved because of a psychedelic journey.
Welcome to Homesick for Lubavitch, a podcast where we explore Lubavitch identity in the year 2024. My name is Bentzi, and I will be your host. Let's begin. Alrighty, so we're here with Eli Nash. Thank you very much for agreeing to come on the podcast.
Thanks for returning the favor.
Yeah, I was gonna say that I was gonna say that you're returning. Oh, yeah, I am returning the favor to you, but I wanted to say thank you for your favor in the first place. It was very nice of you to have me on the podcast. It also gave me a bit of a kick in the pants to launch my podcast finally.
Because you spoke about it on the podcast.
I had the idea. No, I had the idea of the podcast before. I had already recorded a few episodes, but like, should I launch it? Should I not launch it? The kind of that hesitation of going public with it. And then once you asked me on your podcast, I'm like, well, if I'm gonna be, if you're gonna put out my episode, I better have my podcast going already. It'd be silly if I didn't. So I had no choice at that point. So you kind of forced my hand. You and Yossi kind of forced my hand. But I was very appreciative of that, and it was also, I was quite amazed, to be honest, of the feedback that I got in the episode. I don't know what kind of feedback you got.
Yeah, it was very different than a lot of the other episodes I do. I go like deep into Lubavitch kind of stuff. I would talk about healing, growth, whatever, go different directions. And here we went into the guts of the system a little bit. So
yeah,
because it was so unique, I got a lot of feedback.
Interesting. Because I told you about it at the time. There was a guy who was related to both of us.
Yes.
To me, family, and by you, to you by marriage. Some people will figure that out. But yeah, he called me up, and I hadn't spoken to him for a while, and he was, we it was really interesting to hear the kind of questions that he had and the kind of thoughts he wanted to share with me. And in general, it's one of the very encouraging things about podcasting is you kind of put an idea out there, and there is a vulnerability to it because you don't know how it's going to be received, if people are going to even listen to it, if they're going to stomp all over it. And some people will, and some people do. But after kind of that initial thing, you start hearing from people, and you realize that these ideas are out there, and it's very encouraging. It's I don't know if the word's rewarding, but it feels nice to realize that your ideas have company, and there are other ideas out there and other people thinking similar things and people joining in the conversation. And
yeah, as I recall, he was intrigued by the idea of davening in English.
Well, I think that's what I shared with you. We had an hour-long conversation.
Okay.
Now I could tell you he's related to me. My guess is if we collected all the conversations I had with him throughout the course of my lifetime, our lifetimes, it probably, all the other conversations together probably would not amount in duration to that one conversation we had after the podcast. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that, first of all, the podcast kind of gave an opportunity for both of us to lay out some ideas at length so that when someone's listening to it, there's time for them to kind of, okay, this is what they're saying. I think about it, listen to it at their own pace. But I think also it probably has to do with like age, like we both grown up, we're both kind of, at different points in our lives, but certainly both along the journey of life. And, the kind of conversations you can or can't have at 20 change as you get older into your 30s, right? Yes. So, yeah, but it was really wonderful. It was one of many people that reached out, and so anyway, thank you for that, and I appreciate that you're returning the favor to me, and I'm returning the favor to you. However we look at it,
right?
Favors all around.
Okay, so let's see where it gets us.
Yeah. So anyway, when I was on your podcast, you were the one asking the questions. I had some questions that I wanted to ask then. I kind of held off on it, and thankfully I have the chance now. Okay. But I want to go a little bit back just for the beginning, just to give a bit of background. What's your backstory? Like, tell me a little bit about growing up? Your mainly your Lubavitch backstory. Like where do you come from and
Like where my parents come from.
no, I mean you could go back that far if you'd like. I mean if you feel that's part of who you are, then sure. But more like who is Eli Nash for people that don't know him?
From like a Lubavitch perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, I grew up in Crown Heights,
Okay.
children of Baal Tshuva, but it wasn't the typical Baal Tshuva because my mom was Sephardic.
Right.
So Sephardic don't consider themselves non-religious.
Right. It's not in or out the same way.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Which is, in many ways, a beautiful,
Absolutely.
something beautiful we can learn from.
My father-in-law's also Sephardic.
Oh, neat. Yeah, so for my mom, she chose to enter a path of Chabad, but it wasn't, even though practically it went from things that she wasn't keeping to things that she was keeping, it wasn't ideologically viewed that way.
Right.
From her family, it wasn't viewed that way.
Right.
It was, okay, so your husband has a beard, why? I mean, it wasn't,
Right.
I don't think the whole transformation was seen as that. My dad was more of like a dyed in the wool Baal Tshuva, but he embraced it in a more, like some Baal Tshuvas like want to be viewed as a Baal Tshuva. You know, they're still kind of, they were hippie-ish in some way. My dad wasn't. He was, does that make sense? Does that distinction amongst Baal Tshuvas make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like one who kind of like wants to like find the road and sit on that one versus how do I bring some of my old life?
Yeah, did he keep his motorcycle or not is a question.
Right, that kind of, right.
Yeah.
Right. I think my dad was like, his old life was gone and this is his new life. There wasn't
Right.
The old stuff that came in. So what was maybe different for me than others, maybe your upbringing, is none of my relatives were Chabad. So we had a view into a lot of life that that wasn't, which maybe put a little bitterness, I think, sometimes for us as children. Like, why can they do this and we can't, right? Whereas if all of someone's relatives are that way, then it's all we see, it's all you know.
It's for sure a tension there. There's no question.
Yeah.
People that grow up in those situations, for sure.
Yeah, but as a kid in yeshiva, I took it seriously. I was on the path, very much. I think I detoured a little bit my teenage years, but like when I was in yeshiva, I took it seriously always.
So when you detoured, at the time, because you're a bit older than me, right? I'm 36.
I'm 38.
You're a couple years older than me. Like at the time, that was still quite novel, right? To detour. It wasn't.
Yeah, maybe in the way I did it was. So I had.
I have no idea. I have no idea how you did it.
Right.
But even the word, like the idea of dropouts, for example, or like not finishing the yeshiva system the way
So I
you're
actually
supposed
did
to.
finish the yeshiva system.
Okay, so what do you mean by detour?
Meaning I started, like I had one foot out the door a little bit.
I see.
really enjoyed the learning. I had one foot out the door in my mind.
Religiously?
Religiously, yeah. But
Okay.
at the same point in time, for me, it was I started this path, I'm going to finish it.
I
If
see.
I have choices afterwards, I'll go. But I didn't want to, like, I didn't drop out of school.
Oh, so you were in yeshiva throughout the system.
I was in yeshiva throughout. The only thing I didn't do was, after yeshiva gedela, I went straight to smicha.
Right, and that was your finale.
Exactly, yeah. The same year I was learning smicha, I started my business.
I see. So you always wanted to go into business. You knew that's what.
No, actually, I wanted to go to school. And I was going to school. I thought I'd be a lawyer.
Really?
Actually, yeah.
Okay, and then.
Business, I was doing as a way to put a little food on the table.
Sure.
To have some money in my pocket. I wasn't doing it to
Sure.
build a career. I thought I'd go to law school.
Right, and then you realize you're a Sephardi.
Right, I had the tension inside me.
Yeah,
I could have been one or the other.
Sephardi. Ain't no Sephardi lawyers. Very few of them, at least. Yeah, I mean, I can't say that I have a similar background, nor do I see the need to make that attempt. But I did grow up in Hong Kong, so while all my cousins, most of my cousins, but besides one or two, were religious, everybody around me immediately was not.
Yeah, you had a window into a world that was not.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. If anything, like I had a window into a world that was what I was. I had a window into the religious world, but the world that I swam in, I mean, in terms of just the world around me, I went to my parents opened up a school when I was a few years old for the community, but really, I mean, they were spurred to do it because they had kids that they needed to put into school, and they built a school for the community. which then meant that we had to go until we were older because it was their baby. And so all my classmates were not religious. I even had some classmates that were not technically Jewish because their parents were intermarried. That landed me in some hot water at some point even. But
right, in some ways the opposite tension.
Yeah, but it was just, it's certainly something that I can conceptualize. So so you finish a system, and I don't mean to paint this like in or out, but it from what I gather, there was a time where you kind of, after the system, you kind of
it's a time when I moved away completely. I mean, the way
Right.
I say it, to put it gently, the only mitzvah I was connected to was tzedakah.
You're religious in your wallet. Religious in your wallet.
Hey, it connected me.
Again, that's Sephardi, man. This is
right. Okay, so you're bringing that up.
Yeah, but okay. So you kind of drifted away. Let's say. What pulled you back? The reason I'm asking these questions is not just to kind of put you out on the table. It's because, like, to me, it's fascinating when someone, because, okay, so let me first ask a different question. What would you say, or how would you define your relationship to Lubavitch today?
That's an excellent question.
Like, you say I'm a Lubavitcher?
I mean, I'm definitely connected, like, certainly to the Rebbe. Like, I'm definitely very connected. So his institutions, his organizations, his learning, his teachings, like that. I'm very connected to it. Am I a Lubavitcher? Like, I'm not putting my kids in a Lubavitcher school, right?
Right.
But...
Well, neither do I. I mean, they're homeschooled now, but...
Right. So that goes back to a lot of the podcasts that we had, was what makes makes someone a Lubavitcher. So I'm kind of, let's say it this way, if I'm deviating from something, right? I've deviated from something, so which means I'm tied to what I'm deviating from.
Right, in a negative sense.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're Lubavitch in as much that you are not fully Lubavitch, is what you're saying.
Exactly. Right. What I'm deviating from is that.
That's kind of your anchor, but you've let the kind of chain unwind a little bit more than perhaps most, but it's still your anchor. Is what you're...
Correct. Yeah, and it's been I'm still very much on the path. I'm still very much on the. I guess we all are.
Right.
But my journey still isn't finished in this regard.
Right. I mean, I'm not trying to like put you in a box. I felt I should first hear how you think about it before I suggest that. To me, it's fascinating when, or it's certainly intriguing when someone chooses, like, you left, you deviated hard. Let's say, besides for financial support, donations and such, and you could have stayed there, like you were there, right?
Right.
And now, and then you come back and you choose it. To me, there's that opens up a whole new, to me at least, understanding of what is this thing that you're choosing, right? Because until now, or when you just kind of go with the flow, in many ways, it's status quo.
Right. It could be by rote. It's not necessarily intentional.
Right. It's like my quip, which is regrettably quite cynical. And like, what's the definition of a Lubavitcher? Someone that marries a Lubavitcher. Right. And so, like, it's like this kind of endless loop where, like, I'm a Lubavitcher because my wife is a Lubavitcher, and she's a Lubavitcher because I'm a Lubavitcher. And it's like, what is this Lubavitch thing? It's everybody just kind of like pass a hot potato. And there is that kind of like status quo where, like, I just don't want to intermarry out. I just want to marry a Lubavitcher and we'll raise Lubavitch kids, but we're never going to figure out what this means. And maybe sometimes you don't need to. Maybe sometimes identity just is kind of who you are, But when you make a hard break from it and you come back, at that point it's a choice. At that point it's not just, you can never go back to status quo, right?
Right. I mean, there's definitely something intentional about it, like I said. And what's interesting is in the coming back, I sometimes say that as I'm coming back, I'm rejecting things from my childhood more forcefully than I ever did. Meaning previously I rejected it I rejected the totality of it.
Right. The baby with the bathwater.
Exactly. And now I'm intentional about what I'm rejecting.
Okay.
Like that's not a good one. You know what I mean?
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, look, this is like, there's always the question of how much of it's individual in the anecdote and how much of it is more of a pattern, which of course is ultimately what a podcast is about, because you don't want it to be just about the specific individual. And to me, that is the crossroads that Lubavitch, at least as I see it, is today. Because as people make more and more choices and it becomes more and more conscious, almost by definition, or more intentional, like you said, by definition, it becomes more fragmented because everybody's intentions are different
Right.
by definition.
Yeah, and I
Right.
think it's also looking at a leaderless system,
Right.
essentially.
Right.
Some would argue there is a leader, but even that, it's
Right.
um, like a leader from a distance or in a way that's subject to the interpretation of the
And you
person.
have to choose to believe that he's
Yes.
present the way he used to be present.
And then
Although,
how are we interpreting the message from then to 2024,
100%.
right? Things and times change. So in that leadershipless role, I kind of feel there's the opportunity for each person to embrace their own path. Like I don't have a model that I'm following.
Right.
I have like I'm my own model. I'm creating it
Right.
as I go.
Which is both a very exciting chapter, right, in one sense, but also in a way very lonely and kind of scary place to be, I think, or at least an uncertain place to be, right?
Yeah, scary and exciting are exactly the same thing.
Oh yeah, you have to have both, right? They're the right,
They're two sides of the same coin. I
right.
saw a sign once at a conference that said, "Fear is excitement without breath," or
Okay. Right.
the other way. Yeah,
Right. Without
so,
the without.
right. So it's exciting and we're breathing through it a little bit, and there's fear and we're breathing through it a little bit, so it becomes excitement. But it's that same thing. It has all the same
Right.
feelings: the unknown, the uncertainty. Something might go wrong. We may hurt ourselves. The
Right.
danger, the risk element. All of that is what makes something exciting.
Right.
The potential for something bigger,
Right.
something beyond anything else that we've seen. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's really really interesting because people come and say, okay, you're just kind of you're making too much of it, and it's like, wait a second, how do you explain the fact? And this is kind of leads us into, I think, your public work at least that I'm aware of. Like, how do you explain the fact that so many quote unquote more typical Lubavitchers come to you for advice
I know it's an
and
interesting thing.
guidance? No, it's like, whoa, so like, is it really like, can you really define anymore who's in and who's out? Is what I'm saying. It's become so much more fluid and so much, like people are asking you, like, okay, so how do you figure it out? How do you connect? And it's like, and so it's not even a matter of like if one agrees with that or not. It's a fact that the lines have for sure blurred, and like nobody, you know what I mean, like the lines,
Yes.
nobody really knows what the lines are anymore. And so this is not a conversation about you or me, and like, for me and you, it's an uncertain thing and we're just making too much of it. I feel like it's much much larger than that, and I think it's larger than most people imagine. I think there's so much in flux now, like we were discussing earlier, the kind of feedback to the podcast, like it staggers my mind, both the quantity and who it's coming from. People reaching out to me and telling me, boy, I've been thinking the same thing, or thanks for kind of articulating it this way, or
Right.
like people you'd never imagine, people like you thought were straight buttons, and just like this guy doesn't think about this kind of stuff. This guy has no interest in this. And it's like, wait, they do.
Yeah.
And it's, so it's a much bigger, there's much more in flux right now than I think people comprehend. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. Do you want to define a little bit how you see your public work? Because I don't want to define it for you.
I think that I'm not targeting anyone or anything specific. I think that I have a chocolate cake, I experience it, and I want to share it. Like that's been my way.
Whatever you're up to is
To a degree, yeah. Always I'm very rarely talking in the moment because I don't want to talk from figuring, like, while I'm figuring it out, because you can have 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You can have, all these false starts. So, for example, there are many aspects of this, but when I talk about working on child sex abuse, and like when I was healing from that, it took 6 or 7 years of working on it before I spoke about it. My porn addiction, 6 or so years of working on it before I started speaking publicly about it. Psychedelics, I was on the path for 3 or 4 years before I spoke about it. It's not something I'll just do and then speak. So I'll be intentional and careful about what this actually is. Try to make sure that I'm not. We're always speaking, and there's a little bit of our schmutz kind of coming through. That's always going to happen. I don't know that we can clean ourselves up completely. We're in the real world, but as much as possible, make sure that I'm not sharing too much crap when I'm putting a message out.
Right.
Because the early processes, we're trying to figure things out, and something that feels like it works doesn't actually have staying power. So we want to kind of understand. But the feeling is that once I experience something positive, I want to share that. That's why I call the podcast In Search of More, meaning it's not a destination that I'm now sharing with. I just try to be as open and honest about my journey and what I've learned. And if I've been given a gift, I want to share it with others. I'll give you an example. I'll put some meat on the bone.
Sure.
So the very first thing I started speaking about, and what's interesting is I actually had an intense fear of public speaking. And perhaps my work with Rosh Lowe and Mic Drop and helping people speak came across your radar at some point. The way that came about was because I had a very intense fear of public speaking. And I still haven't met anyone with a fear as intense as mine was.
Really?
At the beginning. Yeah, it was ridiculously intense. I was very comfortable in a one-on-one, 3 or 4 people conversations. But once something clicked in my brain that this is a public talk, I folded. I completely folded. And it really wasn't until going to addiction recovery and having that meeting setting where I was advised to speak that some of that started loosening. Where sometimes the only thing I would say was, hey, I don't have anything to say, but my sponsor suggested that I say something in each meeting because it'll help people get to know me, so I'm sharing that. And eventually, through talking, I got over the fear. But what happened was through my journey of recovering or healing the sexual abuse I went through as a child, I had an opportunity to meet with the guy who abused me. And when I did, and I have the story on YouTube for those who are interested, it's under Secrets. I called it, if someone puts on YouTube, Eli Nash Secrets for Jewish Community Watch, it's like my story of confronting the person who abused me. And when I did, it kind of flipped the whole narrative on its head, where he was the powerful one and I was the weak one.
I saw that somewhere. I think I saw you talking about that.
Yeah. So when I had that experience, I left with compassion for this man. I mean, it was a very bizarre experience. I left with the feeling that I'd rather be me than him.
Right.
Which my whole life, I felt like he overpowered me and I was the weak one. And after meeting with him, I said, I'd rather my memories than his memories. Like, his memories are much worse than mine. He has to sit there, figure out how to wrap his head around sexually abusing someone.
You were his only victim?
What?
You were his only victim?
He said there was one other one at the time, but he was a teenager. And I was from 8 to 10. Like, it went on for a number of years. But he now had to reconcile how he can look at himself in the mirror knowing these memories. That wasn't as tough for me. For me, I had to confront it and deal with the pain of it.
Right.
This is what happened to me.
Right.
But he was
I'm sure. That makes sense,
the doer of that. And I was like, wow, I'd much rather be me than him in this scenario. So it kind of flipped the power on its head. And I felt like I tasted a slice of the universe very few people taste. Most people never reconcile with their abuser, never get this moment.
Right.
Be able to sit across from them and have a conversation and humanize their monster, so to speak. And I was inside was this overwhelming desire to share this with the world. Like, it's possible to heal from this. If we really understood what was going on here, we wouldn't be dehumanizing the experience. We wouldn't see ourselves as a victim. I saw all these gifts that were aspects of this, beautiful gifts that were within that story that after I met him, I was able to unpack. And I felt like, hey, I want to share this. That's kind of where the podcast and how I view my story. It's not about anything other than me sharing what's been gifted to me.
I see. The cup overflowing, basically.
Basically, yeah. And it can go in any direction.
Mm.
So today it's healing, great. And if at some point in time I embrace fitness as a way of life and I see that this is something that's...
Then you're encroaching on my space.
Right, that's true. Right,
I'm
then I'll
kidding.
start talking about that.
I'm kidding. By all means, the more the merrier. The more the merrier. Yeah, I mean, it just comes back to that. It just comes back to that same point where as the lines kind of, I don't know if the words blur, because in a way that makes it sound like it's something wrong about that or something weak about that. But as the lines shift, or as the lines move to different places, as we see the lines differently, like the whole model of mashpia and makabel kind of changes, right? In the sense that, like, when everything is very ordered, there's a hierarchy.
Right.
So this guy is the Hasidic master, and he's a person that we have to learn from. And I'm not making fun of that. I mean, it makes
Yes.
sense, right? There's a hierarchy. But as things get decentralized, and as things kind of get more messy, or more decentralized and more varied, suddenly who's a mashpia, who's a makabel, we don't know. I mean, I hate to what's the word, bring up a source to kind of prove myself right. So I don't mean to do it that way, because for every source one can quote, there's a source that says otherwise. Like,
Right.
But there's certainly an idea, there's a strain in Hasidic thought about this very kind of subversiveness, where, like, for example, the idea that, like, I mean, one example that jumps out is like Simchas Torah, we dance with the feet, and that's like the happiest Yom Tov, right? The feet are the lowliest part. Like, the head is,
Right.
like, the head is the no, but Simchas Torah, we don't use our head, we use our feet, right? There's something very subversive about that, right? Where the feet suddenly, they become the leaders as opposed to the head, right? And of course, if that's taken too far, it becomes anarchy.
Correct.
Right. It's like, every person's ideas should, no, it's a disaster. But the idea is more that what you think is a makabel could also be a mashpia. What you think is a person who's receiving wisdom also has wisdom to teach you, right? And there's something very exciting about that as a time in I think in Lubavitch life, whatever that means, right? Because on one hand, it could exclude both of us. On the other hand, it could include both of us. That's what's so exciting about it.
Right.
Is that as we all kind of in our own ways figure out where exactly this leaves us, there's all kinds of new opportunities to learn from each other and learn from different people, things that, like, we never have had that kind of opportunity before, because we would have just kind of, oh, that guy, no, he doesn't check the boxes.
Right, 100%.
So yeah.
I had someone buy me for Shabbos this week, so he's a friend of mine for a number of years, who, the first time I met him 5 or 6 years ago, said he had got married, he has a child, but he really would like a Jewish wedding. Okay? And do I know a rabbi who can help him officiate a Jewish wedding? So I said, sure, and I introduced him to Rabbi Schneur Kaplan in Fort Lauderdale.
Right.
Since then, he's become very frum. And Erev Shabbos...
What did you do, man?
What?
What did you do?
Nothing to do with me. Erev Shabbos, he was here. And then he's at yarmulke, tzitzis. And while... I mean, I hadn't davened, like, right up until Shabbos started. So I was putting on tefillin while he was davening mincha. Right? It's like, for me, like, that was where each of us are at, right, on our place. Like, he's very, very, very into it. And he was coming to me, like, all Shabbos long with... He heard Shimon Gamliel said this and that. Like, he had, like, names and terms and different apps that he's learning from Yossi Paltiel and everyone else. He knew a lot. And at some point he asked me if some sort of board game, where he lives, there's no Jewish community. So he's home with his family, and his wife has embraced it. I don't know, embraced the Shabbos to some degree, but it's been difficult because they live alone.
Right.
And, kind of in the middle of nowhere. And he's wanting to keep Shabbos more and more. And his wife and children have kind of come on board, but he's kind of figuring, how much to push, how much not to push.
Right.
And he's definitely embraced more of the fire and brimstone message than, you know, I would love. In any sense, he asked me about. He said, I just learned about this idea of borer, and I was wondering if on Shabbos you're allowed to separate Uno cards or stuff like that. And I was like, okay, like this is getting a little dangerous.
It's getting out of hand.
It's kind of dangerous. But so I bought, Yaakov Goldstein. He has like his whole like question answer on the laws of Shabbos.
I don't know.
Okay, it's whatever. It's like a 7-part compilation.
Okay.
So I bought it a while ago because as I get closer to Shabbos, I don't want to read the whole book because I don't want to know too much.
Okay.
But if I have a question or something, I go there. Anyway, so I pulled it up. And he didn't go into much detail, but he did say that chess is okay on Shabbos, right? Chess is potentially separating, right, the right pieces from the black pieces. But he said it's okay. And in there, he said something that, like in this section on games, we were reading 2 different sections. One was swimming on Shabbos and one was games. And it said something that it's advised not to instruct women and children too much on some things because they're not going to listen anyway. So it's better they do it out of ignorance and they do it.
Yeah, I remember that.
Right.
I remember that. It's from Shulchan Aruch, yeah.
So, anyway, so I showed it.
Gemara, yeah.
So I showed it to him there, like, go easy on your wife and kids. Like, I experienced some of that, and I pushed back against it. Like,
You experienced that as a kid.
Yeah, I experienced it. There was why does someone's negativity have to be put onto Shabbos, put onto these things? It's shared in an oppressive way, and then my association is oppressive,
Right.
and then I have to unlearn that to reconnect, which has been my journey. Anyway, so after Shabbos, I'm making a long point, but after Shabbos, my thought was that he's teaching me something very powerful about how I can be, right? Like he's embraced it and he's not too worried about pushing his wife and pushing his kids, and I'm overly sensitive to that.
Right.
Like I take something on, I don't even want to tell my wife and kids anything.
Right.
Right? Just, I'll do it in the most minimally abrasive way. Don't inconvenience them at all because I felt like I was.
Right.
So I felt like he was teaching me that I can learn something from him.
Right.
And then I felt like I had to teach him to dilute some of his intensity.
Right.
So meaning that idea of who is learning from who, when I was reflecting on the Shabbos, was like we both should be learning from each other. And that's kind of the idea, like there must be a makabel that you're saying. And in other environments, it probably had very much as hierarchy. Okay, I go to him, what's the answer? He's above me, he's one step, higher up the food chain, closer to the Rebbe, let's say.
Right.
Or, been at this longer, his grandfather was closer to a previous Rebbe or whatever.
Right.
And here it's, I think, that opportunity to learn from...
Right, absolutely. It's ultimately, it boils down to a sense of humility, I think. Like, because to accept, in a way, it's so much more secure to have that kind of hierarchy, to know where you stand, to know where others stand, to know how do I get to that next rung, like the corporate ladder almost, like if you work X amount, you'll get up to there, there's a system here that makes sense. There's a security to that, or at least 100%. It feels secure, more secure. Whereas when things start getting wild and like unpredictable, it's like, wait a second, I have to learn from this guy. Like where does that put me? And there is something unsettling about that. There's something humbling about that, where suddenly you have to, this guy's something to teach me, and like even this guy, and even that guy, and this other guy. But I feel like that's where we're at today. That's where we're at. And,
right. Whether we like it or not, it's what's happening.
Yeah, it's where we're at, because
it's like fighting against the internet.
It's like, exactly. It's like fighting against the internet. It's like there's when you live in a time, and I don't know if there's an analog in Jewish history. I'm sure there are similar times, or times that we can learn from. But when you live in a time where the whole hierarchy of community breaks down, and people have at least a seemingly unlimited choices at their disposal of how they're going to live their life. There is, on one hand, like we've been talking about, all this opportunity to do different things, but there's also this uncertainty that comes with that. Like they call it the paradox of choice, right?
Yes.
Right, where, in a way, when you have too much choice, you end up being paralyzed by that choice. And so when we have so much choice, we have no choice but to learn in new ways and grow in new ways. And I'm learning more and more, and it should be clear. This does not come naturally to me. It doesn't come. It doesn't like this. I was not always. I did not always think this way, and I still have to kind of remind myself this. Where, like this, there's what to learn from this person. There's what to learn from that person. What does that do to my identity if suddenly this guy who I thought was here is now up here?
Right.
Yeah. That's what you're gonna figure out. That's not, like, it's better to have that challenge of figuring out what that means and how that changes you than to shut it all out and be stubborn, because A, you're closing yourself off from all kinds of opportunities, but B, you're closing yourself off from your reality, right? We're all kind of navigating this uncertain world together, and you trying to, or a person trying to like do it the way it was always done, and just like have it the straight and narrow way, it's not going to be to your benefit.
Oh, it's exactly what you're saying. The amount of choices that we have today is much larger than someone else had, which means because we have more choices, defining success for each of us is so unique. So, for example, someone born 200 years ago, if their father was a rabbi, probably their grandfather was a rabbi, and their
Right.
great-grandfather was a rabbi, and as soon as they pass, they'll be a rabbi also.
Right.
And success was defined from them the moment they were born.
Right.
Following this path, this is what success looks like. It's kind of binary. You're going to go here,
Right.
or you're going to fall off. Like, those are the only two choices.
Right.
And if there was no pogrom coming to town, it was actually going to be in the same city that their father and grandfather
Right.
did it in. And now it's just not like that. We're not going to live in the same place. We may not marry someone from the same community.
Right.
Our job may be completely different. It's just, there are
Right.
many, many, many more choices.
Right. No, you also could choose to not be part of your community, and there's much more possibility of you still making a good life for yourself.
Sure, choose to do it in your
Right.
way.
You don't need the community as much as you used to survive. And so there's that sense of, if I don't like it here, I can go somewhere else. So ultimately, we are all forced into this kind of existential search of figuring it out for ourselves. The To me, the hopeful idea in all of it is that there are others going through the same journey. Most people around you are going through that same journey. Some people are more open about it. Some people are more, let's say, exotic about it. But this is the time. This isn't anything strange in someone. You're not strange for realizing that something is afoot, and that you have to kind of you have to be very present to what's going on. You can't just let things kind of coast along. There's nothing wrong with you, and there's not everybody else, but a lot of people around you are also going through that. I don't want to beat the drum of that too much. I do want to ask you a little bit about, because you spoke about your journey with I think your work on what did you on sexual abuse is
Yes.
well documented and well known. I think your work on porn addiction is also quite well known. I think your work on you're talking about psychedelics is becoming more well known. It's a more recent thing that you're talking about. So I don't want to rehash things that people can research online, or people have heard about online. But I am curious to know, what's your take on what would you ascribe to what seems to me to be an explosive growth of psychedelic use in the Chabad community in the past few years? First of all, is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, 100%. It's not only the Chabad community, so it was already for years before that in different different Hasidic communities.
Yeah.
Well, Borough Park, Williamsburg.
I heard
etc.
about it.
But if you look at it more broadly than that, it's in the whole world.
Right.
And I'll make one point from that you were saying before about like someone can move to a different location, right? That like the whole world's at their fingertips. Like, that's looking at the technology of the universe. It's not that Judaism changed,
Right.
and suddenly we're able to travel to different places.
Right.
There's a technology now of airplanes and
Right.
cars, and it's just very easy to get from one place to the next. And for
Right.
someone to say, I want to move from New York to Miami, they can make that decision very,
Right.
very quickly.
Right.
And they have a whole community there, and they'll find their kosher food and kosher restaurants and a job and everything else if they put a little work into it. So with psychedelics, it's not just like the Chabad and Jewish community. It's there's
Sure.
something happening on a much more grander scale where these are becoming more and more mainstream. They expect this year, for example, there's an organization called MAPS, which focuses on studying MDMA therapy, which they're mostly focused on its work with PTSD.
Right.
You know, really patients suffering from more. But that was, I think, really their push to make it acceptable to the American mainstream, because if you talk about psychedelics, the left loves it. And if you talk about helping veterans from war, the right loves it. So they figured out a way to kind of bring that into the mainstream. But they expect that as soon as this year, it'll be fully legal to do MDMA therapy.
Okay.
Right. So meaning it's not just something happening in Crown Heights. There's a much larger,
Oh, for sure.
larger thing at play. So I think what
I read the book by Michael Pollan a few years ago.
How to Change Your Mind.
Yeah.
Yes. So if I had to explain it in this way, so my understanding of psychedelics, amongst other things, I mean, it's a broad world, but one thing it certainly does is force you into the present moment.
Mm-hmm.
There's nowhere to go but here, and sometimes it brings like the intensity of the present moment that you can feel you almost feel like you can feel the new energy that was just introduced into the universe with this collective breath that everyone has an opportunity to take at this moment. Like you can feel it, that like the sensitivity on that level, but that push towards it, I think, is coming from the other side, this relentless distraction that we have at all times. So it's like that thirst is suddenly becoming very, very apparent.
Do you feel though that there's something unique? I point taken that like Lubavitch isn't an island. Like we're part of the world, and the mobility and the social mobility and the financial mobility has a lot to do with trends that are much larger than
Correct.
Lubavitch itself. I point taken, but there's still particular flavors to community that help you understand specifically on this communal level why things are happening, even if they're happening in other places as well. Do you think there's something
Specific about Lubavitch?
Yeah.
So it'll likely follow the trend in other communities. What I think happened here is like this. Take my story, right? How did I come back, so to speak? Like what was that U-turn that I made? So the U-turn that I made was that when I went to 12 steps, it was communicated to me kind of point blank. Ellie, where your addiction's at, you kind of have two choices. Either you embrace a spiritual life or you give into your addiction. Like those are, the choice has pretty much been made for you.
Who made that for you? Who made that clear to you? A rabbi?
No, within the 12-step recovery. So essentially, if you look at 12 steps when it was formed, there's some early communication between Bill Wilson, known as Bill W., one of the founders of AA, with Carl Jung.
Okay.
And in one of those communications, Carl Jung says something to the effect of, for these kinds of alcoholics, I've seen no other cure other than a complete spiritual transformation. Right? They had to adopt a worldview of there is a higher power.
Right.
Essentially, I'm not in control, because if you look at addiction at its root, it's trying to control the little we could control. So it's feeling so out of control that saying, hey, if I can control just this sliver of my existence, then everything will be okay. And the way out of that is to give up control. So you can give up control to a higher power. So the 12 steps, even though it was originally introduced through Christianity, stripped it of its Christian origins and just said, let's focus on the spiritual aspects of it, and let's make it available to everyone. You know, Jewish, Muslim, Christian, or non-religious at all. Just embracing a spiritual worldview. And that point that Carl Jung made is now embedded in the 12 steps, which when people come there, they'll tell you, it's like, if you've had to come here to figure it out, to try to get a hold of your addiction, that means you've already gone to therapy, you've already tried to stop yourself, you've already done everything. So we're kind of the last house on the road. No one's walking into 12 steps as the first option on how to deal with this uncontrollable addiction. Right. It's the last option.
We know where you're at if you're here.
Exactly. So for those people, the way out is through embracing spiritual life. And I remember when I saw it, the first step just says, We admitted we were powerless over addiction. Our life had become unmanageable. I'm like, okay. The second step was a little bit like, okay, now you're touching spirituality. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Okay, power greater than ourselves. Maybe a sponsor can help me. I didn't have to embrace anything. But then you see the third step is made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood God. And I remember being super intimidated by this word God. I had just walked away from everything associated with God. And now you're introducing it to me, but I kind of had no choice on the one hand. Like I knew I wanted out of this life. And on the other hand, there was a third step. So I said, okay, like there's a reason it's third and not first. Let me just do the first, do the second, and then I'll worry about the third when I get to the third. Maybe there's something that I'll understand afterwards. But eventually, as I came to that, it was embrace a spiritual life or don't. And there was a point in time, it's interesting, that I had a Christian sponsor. And it was a Christian monk who a lot of them would love nothing more than to convert a Jew. I mean, it would be a very exciting thing. And I'm not saying that I was there in my mind, but I was saying is that I was desperate and open enough to look at anything. I just knew I wanted something different than I was getting. And he told me, he's passed away since, but he told me something. He said, Eli, you'll know your recovery has taken root when you reconnect with Judaism.
Really?
Which was very special for him to say. It's not like, had he suggested, hey, maybe we can find something there, I don't know that I would have had much to resist him for. I wanted a different way of life, and maybe there was somewhere else. And I saw it, by the way. I saw it with other Jews in recovery who came in and started going to church and started going to other things because they were desperate for.
Right. And they associated their Judaism with some negative things also.
Correct.
Probably.
Correct. Right. But for whatever reason, he was kind enough to plant that, and that's certainly been the case, is that I've reconnected and continue to reconnect in different ways with Judaism, but at the same point in time, forcefully rejecting certain things from my childhood.
Even that anecdote that you just said, I think you want to make a larger point, but I even that anecdote that you just spoke about, I mean, it just takes the whole idea of like who is giving and who's taking, and just makes it even more complicated, right? Because here you have you're telling a story about how in many ways your return to Yiddishkeit is now thanks to the advice of a Christian monk.
Right.
Right? And like, you go back 100 years, and that is such a mind twist. Like, it's incomprehensible. 1 second. Your Yiddishkeit, you're thankful for your Yiddishkeit to a Christian monk? And you still, like, what are you even talking to a guy for? Like,
right.
The whole thing is like, it's incomprehensible to the old way. Like,
yes.
And and you're okay with having your Yiddishkeit kind of having a Jewish gratitude to the guy of all people, you know what I mean? To the priest to the Galach, you know what I mean? To the Galach. And I'm not making fun of that time. In those times, that's what made sense. The lines were so sharp, and the antagonism was so obvious, and the in and out was so clear that's how life made sense. But today, I just wanted to point out like how like the theme just gets even more complicated as you think about it.
Yes.
Not to mention that you have a whole recovery community that's inspired by these ideas. It's not just you.
100%, yeah. And I mean, the amount of Jews who found God here, it's unbelievable. Right?
In recovery. What do you mean by here? In recovery?
Here in recovery, yeah. So if you look at my story,
right.
I went to yeshiva system for years, and I left not believing in God.
Right.
And I found God. It wasn't a church basement, but figuratively it was a church basement, because most meetings are in church basements.
Right.
This happened not to be.
Right.
Right. It was in like a little community center, but it may as well have been.
It could well have been.
Could well have been, yeah. A couple of the meetings were, like at one point in time, I remember the meetings we would go to closed, so they said, okay, for the next month, the building was undergoing construction. For the next month, we're going to be at this church on Lincoln Road.
Well, at that time, it seems like you didn't care.
Yeah, but even if I did, right?
You would have walked into a church, you said.
Right, even if I did, it would have been okay.
Right, I see.
Right, I mean, there is permission not to go into the main sanctuary, but
I see.
To go into the side rooms, like that is already okay, because addiction is viewed as a life and death situation.
I see.
Certainly, but yeah, there's a lot of irony here that's very, very rich. I'll tell you something else. So when I got married, my wife and I got married in Italy, at this place called Villa San Michele. It's outside of Florence, right? In Florence.
My wife's from Italy. I've been to Florence.
Okay, so Florence is like one big church.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Funny story. I don't mean to cut you off, but just to amplify that note, my wife and I we were visiting Milan. We went to Florence for one day, and it turned out to be like the coldest day in like Italian history for like 50 years. It was freezing cold, and we had a baby with us. It was our first child, and we were desperate to stay out of the cold. Like, it was just freezing outside. And the building we walked into, it took me 2 seconds to realize I'm in another church.
Right.
To get the hell out of here, back into the cold. They're like trying to find some warmth. Anyway,
Yeah. No, that's what it is. It's the whole place is one big church.
whole big church.
Yeah.
Like, even the museums, everything's a church.
Everything. So, and like when this was like just outside of Florence, like on a mountaintop, and it's looking down, and you have that main cathedral,
Right.
that's kind of like the
Right.
highlight of the landscape. In any sense, so the building, the hotel was a 15th century monastery
Okay.
that they then converted to a hotel. And today's a hotel. There's not much monastery. There is a cross on the top. So when we came, we said, hey, we're renting it out for the wedding. Do you mind removing it? They're covering it. They were okay. And then there was like a Sistine Chapel or something, like the Last Supper that was painted
Right.
in one room. And we said, hey, can we cover it? And they were very accommodating in those
Right.
ways. But what was interesting that over the weekend, we had a weekend wedding, so we had, it was Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday, and Sunday night was the wedding. So over Shabbos and all the minyanim, the people who were talking or anything else, and we actually made a very Jewish wedding. Even though my wife and I at the time weren't very observant, we did a lot of things that were very, very, it was a very, very Jewish wedding. So a lot of people were saying, almost every speech, someone pointed out that here we are bringing light and holiness to this depraved place.
I see.
And there was something like continuously, it just rubbed me the wrong way. I'm like, that's not my story. Like, I don't know what story you're this is not my story. It's not my story at all. So I got up at my wedding and I said, listen, I respect everyone's position. I don't know what's light and what's dark. I'm not pretending to know. So maybe this place was darkness until we did a mitzvah here. I have no idea. I'm just telling my story. And I said, to me, it's very symbolic that I'm having a very, very Jewish wedding at a 15th century monastery, because without that Christian monk sponsor, I'm not here.
Huh.
So that's, it's like that.
How about that?
Right. So it's like, it's further, like what you're saying is very, very, very deep. And it does throw a lot of stuff on its head.
Oh, yeah. It's frightening. It's really, because even now I'm thinking about it, it's like, okay, we're talking about this, and I mean, I can speak for myself as much as it's worth. I feel like I'm talking in good faith. I'm not a Christian missionary. Okay? I don't believe in Christianity. I am certain that you don't either.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, certain as I can be, right? And yet I could see why someone listening to us is saying, "Oh, wait 1 second, you're kosherizing, kosher Jesus kind of thing. Like you're kosherizing this thing. Like, Christianity has a dark history in Judaism.
For sure.
Like they've done some really, really dark,
No
depraved
question.
stuff to Yiddishkeit. Like, it's to Jewish people, to your grandparents, my grandparents. It's real." So, no, that's of course not our intention. Our intention is not to say that like Christianity somehow now has become kosher. It's just to point out that in a world of that's so intermingled, there will be situations where you can learn, and you can, in your case, like you're describing, you can have your life changed for the better by an interaction with the most unexpected place.
Right.
That's the point. You're not trying to say now the Galach is a rabbi.
I'll tell you
You're not trying to
something
say the monk. I didn't call him a Galach. You're not saying the monk now is a rabbi and that like so he should be a rabbi. That's
Right.
what you're saying, right? You're saying that he's a monk. He
I'm
stays
just
a
telling
monk.
my story.
Right, he stays a monk, but my Judaism is thanks to him.
In some part, thanks to him. I'll tell you, even the story gets deeper, right? As you're speaking about it, it gets a little deeper. Because when I came to the meetings, I was introduced by my therapist, who was a frum guy, to one of his other patients who went to meetings also.
Okay.
His patient was a Jewish guy, but very, very secular. And when I was speaking to him about the program, and he was helping me at the beginning get sober, and when I was speaking to him, he stripped out all spirituality from recovery. So he was a Jewish individual, but when I said the word God, he's like, it doesn't mean God. God is also acronym group of drunks. It doesn't have to be God. So he stripped out all spirituality from it. And I'm like, you're rereading the language, when
Who did the
my
other
sponsor, my first sponsor,
guy?
no,
The other guy. That
my
you
first
introduced to.
sponsor was a Jewish guy, very secular Jew,
I see.
and he stripped out all spirituality.
Right.
So, and it was bothering me because
Jews are quite adept at that.
right. So it bothered me because growing up learning Gemara a lot, you can sit there, like analyze a word for days.
Yep.
And the thought process that, you're reading something like the 12 steps is that they probably agonized over every single word
Right.
in this thing.
God is God.
Right. God is God. And they say very specific things about him.
Right.
Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God.
Right.
Why not just say will? Why not just say lives?
Right.
So what's the difference between will and lives? Why do you say to the care of God, to say to God? Right. So it's like very specific things that I
Right.
was drilling into that I felt like the 12 steps was trying to communicate about God. And here I am talking to the sponsor who's just taking everything out of it.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I speak to when someone goes to recovery meetings, so it's kind of like the old timers, right? It's like the hierarchy. They're kind of like the older timers who become the sponsors. And then you have the people who are coming in at around the same time who start, we're kind of in the same place. So we're finding our footing, and then you create a kind of a camaraderie with them, and then looking up to the old timers. So I was speaking to one of these guys, non-Jewish guy, who was a guy who had come in around the same time that I was. So he was sharing my struggle. And I told him about my interactions with my sponsor. And he's like, oh, I got to introduce you to my sponsor. I got to introduce you to mine. He really helped me with my spirituality. And that's how I met the Christian monk.
This monk.
Right. So meaning like the story gets richer because I was actually working with a Jewish individual.
It didn't work for you.
It didn't work. Why? Because the spirituality was missing. And who introduced it to me? And I was introduced to him under that context. This guy can help you with your spirituality. So it kind of does. It blows your mind open a little bit.
Right.
It's
the story of Baal Shem Tov, because I know there's something in my head that I'm being reminded of. There's a story of Baal Shem Tov where like they saw the guy making a cross out of the ice, and he challenged his Talmidim like, "What's the lesson here?" And they couldn't figure it out. And he said that, like with the right passion, even ice can become something holy, like sacred or something. Like, and maybe I'm wrong with the story. I'm not trying to blame our conversation on the Baal Shem Tov. That's not my point, but. Like there's certainly stories that I've heard that kind of speak to that, where maybe in the olden days, and maybe still today, you need a tzaddik to kind of give a stamp on that kind of transformation, like the Alter Rebbe taking Napoleon's March and turning into Niggin. Maybe we should, like just because Alter Rebbe did it, we don't have the right to do it. But what's so rich about your story, it's not that you are advocating for something. You're saying what happened.
Right. I'm just saying what happened. And
it's like the Gemara says, Ma'asim b'chol yom. This isn't a one-off that happened. This is things that happen all the time. We have stories where, there's a business partner who happens to be a Christian, and, he kind of says something. He helps you with your marriage.
Right.
I mean, not you, but there are stories where people's marriages are helped out because their Christian partner told them something that they heard who knows where. I mean, we know where. And it's like, wait, so 1 second. So we don't know anymore the origins of things. And where does that leave us? That leaves us in a very uncertain place. Now, to me, the question, or like the line, where does it become a problem? It becomes a problem where we fall into like moral relativism. We're like, oh, okay, so if everybody's learning from everybody, so everything's kind of equal, and like there's there's nothing absolutely true. We're all kind of just where kind of spirituality becomes the thing, where like everything's just another flavor of spirituality, and that's where this can lead, right? But I don't think it has to lead there. I don't think it has to end up in a place of moral relativism or spiritual relativism. I think you can be secure in like, I'm holding on to a tradition that I believe is true, that this is my tradition, this is my truth, this is what I believe to be the ultimate truth. But in the world that I live in, I'm taught lessons, and I'm returned to that truth in all kinds of inconceivable ways. Like God's ways are mysterious.
Right. I think the lesson I take from it is that like there is good and there is bad, and it's not as obvious to what meets the eye, and the time we're in is kind of exposing that, so to speak.
Right.
So meaning in much the same way, a lot of people said, going back to the sexual abuse conversation, that when people are talking about it, it's lashon hara and everything else. What lashon hara? Like, what are we talking about? It's such a crazy response to someone protecting themselves or protecting other people. It's like completely irrelevant to the topic at hand.
Right.
It was like, I don't. It would be like, I don't know. I'm trying to think of an example, but like if someone borrowed someone's phone to call someone from Gaza when something was going on, right? Or like at the attack in Israel,
Right.
they took their phone without asking you. It's like, but you're calling from a stolen phone. I mean, like,
Right.
has nothing to do with, we're dealing with very, very serious issues, and you're talking about
Right.
someone talking negatively about someone, like completely disconnected from anything. But what we found from those stories coming out more and more is that just because someone is a rabbi doesn't mean they're good, right? Like there's good and there's bad, and it's not immediately recognizable based on their title,
on the credentials.
Exactly. And I think that that's kind of where this is falling out. Is yes, this person is a good person. Like at the end of the day, I don't know what his teachings were, right? And I'm not saying he in other ways he hurt me. I go to other parts of the story, but in other words he hurt me and wasn't perfect for me. But in this way, in reconnecting to my Judaism, that aspect of my story, like he was a very unhealed individual.
I see.
Right, and
he wasn't the perfect sponsor.
No, and I did meet him in recovery from sex addiction, and he earned every bit of that title.
I see.
However, in terms of my Jewish story, he was very important to it. Like there was something that was good that he delivered to me. Like he didn't get lost in the other message. He says, Eli, for you, I'm going to give you this message. What is best for you is to reconnect to your roots.
But when good and evil becomes so, or good and bad becomes so confusing or so confused,
then we have to do the work.
How do you not lapse into moral relativism or say like, you know, Judaism is just another flavor of good?
I think that's how we have to do the work. It's very similar to me, the psychedelic conversation, right? Where a lot of people throw it like out immediately and say, Avodah Zarah, Avodah Zarah, Avodah Zarah, right? They'll just, boom, throw it out. Or they're waiting for the therapist to get on board. Not therapists, they're waiting for the...
rabbis?
The like American legal system. Like, when they say, when a doctor says this is the method, I need this made-up credential that's given by a made-up university, right, to say that now this is healthy, but here's my lived experience.
Right.
And it's not only mine.
Right.
Person after person after person after person has this experience of transformation under medicines. And I'm not saying it's a panacea. It doesn't solve everything. And there's a lot of danger. It's very, very powerful tools. So I don't know if we want to go into a whole conversation on that. But what I do advocate for is just an open-mindedness around these things.
Right.
Like this very, very fixed idea: good, bad, right, wrong.
Right.
You know, let's see what's going on over here. It's exploding in the world, and then here you see someone. I've seen marriages saved.
Right.
Marriages, like literally marriages saved, families which were preserved because of a psychedelic journey, and you want to throw it out because it may be a Avodah Zarah, which no one has been able to define for me yet, by the way.
I mean, it has kind of associations with Avodah Zarah, but that doesn't mean a definition. Yeah,
and and we should be careful with it. There's no question. We should be careful.
But by the way, yoga does too, and people have less of kind of allergy to yoga. Yoga has all kinds of associations as well, and so you know, I think I'm not trying to be a smart aleck. I think that just points to there are plenty of people who are more okay with yoga who are scared of psychedelics. I think what's going on here is more just the fear of the unknown, frankly.
Of course, yeah.
I mean, to be honest, I'm not into psychedelics. I'm not, so like I'm not speaking from a place where I need to defend it. I'm not into it, but I wouldn't say I have an issue with it, but I certainly I just think that like this kind of slapdash, like it's a Avodah Zarah, is more indicative of a deep-seated fear of what is this? What's this? You know,
exactly.
Like what are you doing here? And so that's where I wanted to go next to the conversation, because I did listen to one of your recent episodes, and I don't want to say the name of the person, although people can look it up if they'd like. And you know, you were talking with your guest about the use of psychedelics and her use of psychedelics, and in general, something that was really interesting to me was she was describing. It was a very moving encounter that she was describing, and I can't do justice to it, but it was a whole story of like how she was with her father. And
is the reason you're avoiding the name? I mean, it's public.
Okay, Leira Bashkin.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, Leira Bashkin. I don't know her personally.
Right.
But I did watch the episode, and she was talking about how she she had confronted her abuser, but the abuser was dead, so it was at the abuser's grave. And her father, this was the first that her father was hearing about it, or at least in detail, or hearing about it from her. Am I getting it right?
I recorded a while ago, so I don't remember.
Okay, I think it was the first time that he was hearing about it in such detail, and it was it. I don't want to go too into detail for it because it's there's no way I can do justice to it. The point that was really in a way evocative to me was there was this very cathartic moment for both her and her father where they both kind of something was opened up, and she describes afterwards this 3 hour drive that they had back from the cemetery to where they were staying upstate in New York, and this conversation with her father, and now that I said the name, everybody knows who her father is. You know, he's a very kind of strong, right?
Yeah.
A strong kind of personality, and she's describing how she's basically teaching him all the things that she's learned over the years, like things that he perhaps didn't pay attention to or didn't realize that were so important. And he's like open now to hearing, now that he's heard what she's gone through in such detail, he starts opening up to how she's dealt with it and all the ideas and Hasidic ideas and psychedelic stuff and all this. And to me, what was so interesting about that was it goes back to our original theme, the tables turning.
Right.
Where it's not, like, one way of seeing it is, okay, so, it's a power struggle, and until now, one generation was ramming it down the throat of the other generation, and now she basically, tables turned, and she rammed it down the older generation. I do think that happens at times. I think sometimes that's what's going on, but that's certainly not how I interpreted her story. How I interpreted her story was, it comes back to the same theme, where there's this moment of such upheaval in this family's life, where a father realizes the depths of hell that his daughter has been through, and also the heights of heaven that she's been to as well, like the healing and the things that she's
and the
encountered,
wisdom she's received,
like the enormity of her experience. And the father realizes that he no longer is right now expected to teach. It's time for him to receive and to study.
Right.
Right. And that once again, kind of speaks to this kind of shifting or overturning of age-old hierarchies, right? And she could still, I don't know if she spoke about this in the conversation. I'm sure in many ways she still learns from her father.
Right.
Like, it didn't seem like now I don't respect him anymore. It's the contrary, right?
Yeah, it was very important for him to be part of that.
Right. I still respect my father. I still learned from him, but now he learned from me. I wonder. So that was my main takeaway from it. But there was also a larger takeaway that I had from it, where, like, I wonder if, going back to the particular flavor of psychedelic use in Lubavitch, or kind of this whole exploration in Lubavitch, is, the new, like, people don't want to only receive, like, they don't want to live completely on the same way that people, even if your parents have means, most people want to make it on their own.
Right.
They want to kind of make a name for themselves, right? And to me, there's this sense where, like, you're Lubavitcher, so you grow up and you basically, your whole identity is defined for you by your parents, right? They tell you how things used to be and how things should be, and, like, all of the kind of the Lubavitch lores in the past, and you're just kind of getting it secondhand. And suddenly, the psychedelics or these new kind of modalities open up a new experience in the present that is yours.
Correct.
I think
yes.
Is
and the information. One thing about psychedelics is that there are messages that I've received from psychedelics that if someone else gave it to me, it would have been too abrasive. I would have pushed it away.
Right.
But under there, I was able to receive it as my own. So that is certainly part of the journey. Where it's like, even though someone can say I didn't work, psychedelics is actually a lot of work.
Right.
Because essentially what it does, like, it heightens the present moment, and then you can choose. Do you want to fight the present moment? Or do you want to surrender to it? So some people they'll take a lot of psychedelics, but they won't surrender to the moment. So they'll fight and they'll fight and they'll fight and they'll find different ways to miss the point, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And then the real question, psychedelics is essentially like a breathing lesson. Like, could we drop you into the full experience of the present moment and you still breathe through that? And you still breathe through it. And if you could, and that's a lot of work, and if you could, then you can be granted a bunch of like gifts, experiences, wisdom, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's not just work. It's not just, oh, I took something and I had a crazy experience. That's part of it. But then afterwards, okay, now here's a message. What are you going to do with it?
Right.
What are you going to do with it? Like, I remember one person, somebody's like, oh, Eli, I've been taking psychedelics way longer than you. I said, I understand. I'm not like, we're not competing. If you think there's a competition here, you take more psychedelics. You know, you'll understand. Like, no one's competing. We're all on the same team. But I don't think we take it the same way. He said, what do you mean? So I said, well, let's say you have two people who go to shul, right? And they both sit there through the whole experience. There's the davening, there's a sermon, there's the kiddush afterwards. One goes through and says it was beautiful, right? Then really leaves with the food tasted pretty good. The other, during the sermon, the rabbi says something about being nicer to your wife. And he commits from that week, you know, I'm going to be nicer to my wife. And his life actually changed, right? From the shul. So they're not both going to shul in the same way.
Right.
They both were there, certainly.
They're certainly not leaving in the same way.
Exactly. One took kugel and one took a life-changing lesson.
Right.
Right. So that's the real work afterwards, is if someone is given that message, will you or won't you choose that path that it kind of gives you? But it's definitely a sense that that it's your own message. Like, I've worked, I've breathed through this moment. That's why I was making that point. And I received some information. It is now mine. It was difficult for me to work. Right. I earned it in some way. And I understand that it's not earning in the same way as, meditating for 30 days on a rooftop. But there is a sense of it's mine. And then doing something from there. But I'll kind of wrap this, I'll kind of like tie it all together, because I believe in our podcast, which was the reverse, I gave a suggestion at the end, which I said, don't get kids out of yeshiva.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? So what was I saying there? And this will kind of tie into like what's happening with psychedelics in the wave there, is that we assumed that the fryouts had nothing to tell us.
Right.
That's what. So we kicked them out.
Right.
We said, you have nothing for us. You're not one of us.
Right.
Go leave. And what's actually happened? What's actually happened is a lot of these kids and families, and every family has, one or two or more that have gone. And if it's not a brother, it's a cousin, certainly.
At this point, for sure.
Yes. And many of them, what they've said is, okay, listen, at the end of the day, we're all searching for the same things: peace, love, freedom, purpose, fulfillment, right? We're all searching for the same things. And some people are finding it in this way. I remember telling my mother once, and I said, Mike, you don't think I would love feeling endless fulfillment at washing Negavasser in the morning? That I truly felt like if I read Tehillim on Shabbos V'Rachim, I was affecting my life, my children's life, my grandchildren's life. I just don't.
Right.
Like, I don't. So I'm out trying to find another way to feel that fulfillment. And because, usually because of a fair amount of suffering, right, that some of us have gone through, we've embarked on our own journeys, right? Where we said, okay, I'm not looking through the classic people for answers. I'm going to go knock on the doors of 12 steps, or I'm going to go try psychedelics and these experiences. And then suddenly these same people went back to their families. Like, they were the early adopters, so to speak. They went back to their families. And then who was messed up and who was the teacher? Like, who had something to learn from who was turned on its head. And it's the child who was considered the sick one because he was abused, or because he was in rehab, or because he was no longer religious, all of a sudden had all this information to share back with the family. And that's something that I've seen on a smaller scale in many, many families, is that there's been one child who's gone through an incredibly difficult experience, and they found the medicine,
right?
Whatever it was, right? 12 steps or psychedelics or something else. And now they're bringing it back to their family.
Right.
And instead of being viewed as a pariah, they're being viewed as someone who actually went on that kind of hero's journey and has an element of wisdom to bring back for the collective community. And then I think for those listening to this, if by chance, who are not on the path of, meaning they've gone off that path, the hero's journey always brings us back home. Right. Like, I don't think my sponsor was my former sponsor was, give me some truth about Judaism. I don't think that was the message. I think the message was, he was giving a blanket message, like your upbringing matters. It's part of your story.
You can't run away from yourself.
Exactly. So come back home at some point. Like, yes, you've had to
Right.
take a detour away, but come back home and figure out why was that part of your story.
Yeah. Beautiful. I would just want to add to that I think that really points also to the power of family, right? Because I've seen what you saw. I've seen it in my own family. I mean, I've seen it in my own family where I have siblings who have, like you said, gone on their own journeys, and it's made. And I've seen it in other families, but we see it all over now. And the closer you are to it, the more you're able to see how the people around it are dealing with it. And it's difficult because it forces families to reconsider so much about what it means to be a family, right? It's right. There's like, you're still family, even though those get bigger and bigger,
right?
And you're challenged. But what you're really doing is you're digging deeper and deeper to figure out, what does it mean to be a family. Like, you can be a family and you can love your child even though things that you never thought possible, right? You thought that it was conditioned on X, Y, Z, and you realize that no, family's stronger than that, and family's stronger than even more than that. And that ultimately, to me, that's a very hopeful message about families, about the Jewish community, which is all about family, right? And Yiddishkeit in general, where it's that's why, to me at least, right? It's all based on the premise of a family. There's forefathers, there's Shvatim. It's all family, right? It's biological, because that kind of tells you that, like, despite all the things that happen, you still have to love that person as part of your family, right? And the love is there. That's the hope. That's the hopeful message. It's there. It's possible. It's real. It's more real than anything else in the world. And, like, coming back to the conversation about Lubavitch, when I started this podcast, a couple people sent me a message. People that I hadn't spoken to in years, and some of them were quite nervous about it. I don't know what they thought I was doing. Maybe I didn't know myself. But even in some of the more cautious and cautionary kind of messages I got, I felt for some reason this sense of family. These people are not related to me,
right?
But, like, this is something very dear to me. It's like we're connected in this somehow. Like, just I believe in what you're doing, but treat it with love and treat it with respect. And to me, that's very touching, because that shows me, and that reminds me that at the foundation of this search, you have your search of more,
right?
But in this search that we're going, and sometimes we make mistakes and sometimes we go too far, but at the foundation of it is family. At the foundation of it is a relationship that's real. It's as real as anything else in the world. It's as real as blood. And maybe I shouldn't use the word blood to end off. That doesn't sound very hopeful. But it's as real. It's as real as anything else in the world. More real than anything else in the world. And to me, that's the core. That's the ultimate hot core of hope that resides at the bottom of all this. That all these journeys and all these kind of ins and outs and confusion, we have to remember. We have to find at the core of it the love for one another, that love of family.
Yeah, and I think that the love creates an openness to see that, if we're connected to this person and they've deviated in some way, then we're also, like, we're connected to that deviation. There's something inside us that's also
absolutely
there, on a smaller family scale and a larger one. And Shais Taub talks a lot about these subjects of children who kind of move away from their parents' ways. And one of the points he makes is that, and he can correct me if I'm misquoting him in any way, is, he can come back on the podcast and correct me. He said that a child who's going off, for parents not to believe that God is in that story too, that this is the direction God is choosing for their life, is not believing in God in some way. Like, this is their journey.
Right.
This is 100% their journey. And I'll share, two thoughts, and I think we can wrap this up. So they both, I don't usually like to share concepts that were introduced to me through psychedelic journeys, because I feel like it's a cheap way to make the point.
Okay.
Like, if it's become part of you, then make the point. You don't have to quote your teacher every time he says something. Like, you've become the knowledge, you become the information. But I think in this context, I feel it appropriate. So one was really connecting me to, okay, like, I'm Chabad. Like, what does this mean? What does it mean I'm Chabad? Right? And I didn't remember this when he asked the question. And one was that, there's a long lineage of fighting for their beliefs with a real fierceness. And willing to risk everything. I mean, I was just watching before, while you were setting up, I was watching your podcast with Dober Pinson. He spoke about how every single one of the Rabbeim, besides the Baal Shem Tov and the Rebbe, were arrested. Right. They sat in prison. There was there was a lot of courage in these people, in the way they lived and fought for their ideas. Right. And to me, that was one of the things, is like, what it meant to me in that moment, like on this experience, is giving me the strength to fight for my ideas in that way. That, sometimes everything was risked in order to do that. And maybe we live at a time critical enough, and we probably do, that we're going to have to fight for some of our ideas. And it's willing to risk. The willingness to risk everything, if I have that, doesn't come from my Sephardic side. It comes from the Chabad, right? The Chabad side of me. That's one. The second one was, I was really dealing with, in the experience, was like struggling with acceptance, knowing that some of my family didn't fully accept my path, right? And still don't completely. It's kind of weird for them. If someone's struggling, sure, call Eli, hopefully he'll have an answer, right? But I'm still not considered, I'm not going to necessarily eat in my house. I'm not as kosher as they are, etc. So
they don't know where to place you.
Right, exactly. So for me, there was a sense of a lack of acceptance, right? Like that feeling, and kind of struggling and working through it. And one of the ways the message came to me to like put it to bed was that in chronological age, parents are older than children. Right. But as far as a soul coming into the world, the soul is more pristine the younger it is. Okay. Right? So if you have kind of two 30-year-olds who are, they've been in the world for a long time. They're sullied. They're dirty by all of these thoughts. So a soul comes in and says, I'm going to help these people out. Like, I'm going to shine my light on these poor couple to see if they can, reach their mission. So it comes into body form. Right. And says, okay, here I am to teach you. Right. Right. Obviously, you need my message. And then a second child, a third child, fourth child, right? And on. Each one, right, sharing more and more, like closer to the truth that everyone is meant to embrace. It's like the last one to the party kind of has the most to show. And usually we don't feel rejected by our younger siblings, right? It's not, it's really, it's like our older siblings, our parents, stuff like that. So it was like being very comfortable. The way I arrived at a self-acceptance was saying that any rejection I may be picking up on is a failure on their part to fully receive the God-given gift that I was meant to deliver to them, right? And that it kind of, I think, puts this idea of children and parents in this very, there's a lot that parents have to teach a child about this world, but there's also a lot that children have to teach their parents. And I'm not saying this only as a child. I'm saying it also as a parent.
And that's part of the Messianic time where the hierarchies get upended, and the hopeful message is that family is strong enough that it can survive that kind of two-way traffic where the child learns from the parent and the parent learns from the child, and the family is strong enough to become even stronger and closer because of that. And that's a wonderful, hopeful message to end this off. It's late. I appreciate your time. This has been wonderful.
Thank you so much.
And thank you again. The music for this podcast comes from the album Repentant Doors by Oren Sor and Nadav Vachar and is used with their permission.